Hello Internet, welcome to the Collective Arcana, a channel all about tabletop gaming. Today we're going to talk about Pathfinder versus 5e.
Right.
What's the difference, which should you pick, not necessarily which is better,
right,
which is a better fit for your table.
Right. So, and we should clarify, when we say 5e, we mean 5e Dungeons and Dragons. And when we say Pathfinder, we mean first edition, because as of this, the time of this video, second edition is not out yet. There's been a lot of play tests, but I'm going to reserve all judgments and any reviews on that until I actually have the core rulebook in hand. Let's just go ahead and get started here. We have 5th edition is right now the biggest game. It's what they play on most of the streams you've probably watched, whether it's Acquisitions Incorporated, High Rollers, or of course Critical Role. And it's a tremendous system. It's great.
Kind of the standard.
Right now, yeah, it's definitely, and D&D's always been the standard. It's to the point where any tabletop role-playing game with a fantasy setting might be called, oh, we're going to go play D&D, even if that's not quite the case. Sort of like calling a soda a Coke. So, and then Pathfinder is a system with a very storied history related to Dungeons and Dragons, which we'll touch on just a little bit. But first edition has been out for about 10 years now, and it's pretty much done at this point. With second edition about to come out, officially they're going to keep supporting it for a while, but that's, take that with a grain of salt.
What does it mean by 3.5 then?
Yes, so 3.5 is what Pathfinder is based on, and 3.5 is, whereas this is 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons was, it's really the game I started on. It's probably why I have such a strong preference for Pathfinder, and it's a much crunchier system, whereas 5e really tried to simplify the game a bit, and I don't mean like dumb it down necessarily, but they did simplify a lot of things, and they did that to get new players in, and they've done really a great job getting a much larger player base than before, as you can see by the boom that's happening. You're probably watching this video right now because of how many people got started with 5th edition. So Pathfinder is based on 3.5, and it was the fact that it's got a 0.5 is probably raising a lot of questions, but don't even worry about that. It's just a revised edition of 3.0 after some bugs were found that weren't caught early on, and it was supported for a long time, probably I would say a good 8 or 10 years. I don't have that exact figure, but so I mean there's a lot more crunch to this game versus 5th edition. 5th edition does a great job of really getting players more into the story side of the game, like I said, simplifying a lot of the crunchy stuff. When I say crunch, I mean math, I mean numbers, I mean some of the more, what might feel to some people as homeworky, and to other people, of course, feels like a lot of fun.
That's not to say you can't have a story, just as good of a story or thick of a story. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, and you can get pretty crunchy with 5th edition too. But yeah, Pathfinder definitely has all the room for story. I mean, the reality is that all the little things that 5th edition did to help people get into the story is great, but most of it just comes down to how you play at your table. All the backgrounds and everything in 5th edition, if your group doesn't like to RP, if your group's really just more about hanging out and killing some orcs, then they're going to play it that way. And Pathfinder, if your group is really about intrigue and character development, the story, you're going to play it that way. There's nothing about either one that is actually, if you boil it down, actually more favorable to roleplay. There are some games that are totally built on roleplay aspects, but the reality is that as much as 5th edition kind of did some things to bridge that gap, they are both still fundamentally combat simulators that encourage you to roleplay for your city life and things like that. Okay, I just want to say that I've only been playing Pathfinder. I've never played 5e, so I'm just going to learn with you here, and I'm going to ask just questions that I have about it.
Okay. Yes, so let's start with what do you get just for buying this core rule book in Pathfinder versus what do you get for buying this is the Players Handbook, and we'll get to we'll get to exactly what the ramifications are of that different name here in a moment. But what you're going to get as a player is you are going to get, I believe, 7 races. Human, half-elf, elf, half-orc, gnome, halfling, and dwarf. It's a lot of halves. So 7 races, and you're going to also get 11 classes. And you're going to get a pretty good amount of feats and equipment and things like that. Over here, in 5th edition, you're going to get actually 9 races, maybe even really sort of more races, because they have the addition of Dragonborn, which is just an extra race completely. But then they also have sub-races of Elf. They have the Drow, and they have the High Elf, and they have the Wood Elf. And then there's also going to be sub-races of Dwarf, sub-races of Halfling and Gnome, I believe. So you really have a lot more racial options out of the gate. And as far as classes go, you actually begin with 12 classes. So there's the standard 11 that are the same ones that are in Pathfinder, the same ones that have been in since D&D 3.5, with the addition in this one of the Warlock, which is a very sort of high flavor spellcaster class, almost like an arcane version of a paladin, sort of in the feel of it.
That sounds fun to me.
It's a lot of fun.
I would probably play that.
I will tell you, I enjoyed my time with a Warlock, but it can definitely be frustrating only having a couple of spells per day.
So you've played just about all of them, I'm assuming.
I've
13 years.
As far as classes go, yes.
No, I mean like you've played 5e and Pathfinder and
I played 5e, Pathfinder, I played some 4e. I played 3.0 and 3.5, of course, and then I've played things that are not strictly the D20 games, and had a lot of fun with all of them. There's definitely a lot of fun to be had with.
Yeah, I don't think any of them are more fun than one another.
No.
I think it's all about having the right chemistry at your table, but
right.
This is more so you can kind of decide which one you want to try, or
right.
if you want to try, the opposite one that you're doing now.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about, we talked about kind of what's the same. You get a similar number of classes. You definitely get a few more racial options in 5e, just out of the gate. But let's talk a little bit now about the big differences. So the primary difference is that in Pathfinder, you have a lot more control over how your character levels up. What I mean by that is you don't just pick skills and have proficiencies. You have to invest skill points. And this can result in a lot more upkeep, a lot more, it can make leveling up take a little longer. But it really allows you to specialize your character in certain ways. Whereas 5th edition, you just have flat proficiencies, things that you're proficient with, you're good at, things that you're not proficient with, you're typically not very good at. And that applies to both your attacks, skill checks, saving throws, things like that, whereas Pathfinder has it sort of separated into multiple little subsystems. Your saves are based on a certain track that levels up at a certain rate. Your base attack bonus can vary by class, and to be quite a big difference. You're talking a level 10, a fighter will have a +10 to hit, versus a wizard would have a +5 to hit.
Yeah.
Whereas in 5th edition D&D, they both have the same attack bonus. The fighter would, of course, have a lot more benefits when engaging in weapon-to-weapon combat than a wizard typically would, but and could make multiple attacks still. But yeah, and then so that's really the big difference is how the characters progress and how quickly they progress. 5th edition has what they call bonded accuracy or bound accuracy, and that's what that proficiency bonus is. It's to prevent situations where your character is almost guaranteed to succeed at something or almost guaranteed to fail at something. It's so that you, even at all levels, you'll have a chance. The D20 will really be important. And then on top of that, it prevents a situation where it really simplifies things for a DM, because I don't have to worry, in 5th edition, I don't have to worry that this character's AC is really good because this character's wearing full plate and has a shield, versus these characters that are just wearing light armor, because the difference between those is never going to be that high.
Would you say then that maybe if it's your first game that 5e might be better?
I'm going to say, as much as I prefer, and I will say that overall I prefer Pathfinder, I am going to say that if you're getting into the hobby right now and you're worried about rules, or you're worried about, am I doing this right? Go with 5th edition. It's very hard to do something
Especially if you're watching that on TV already.
Yeah, especially because there's going to be all kinds of references.
I will say that was a little confusing for us, because Critical Role, when they did this, it's one action, and and we have a video on the Unchained Action Economy,
which is what we use with Pathfinder. We're not really going to get into that, because this is, I want to compare the core, what you get out of starting out with.
Could you use that with 5e too?
I think so. I mean, you'd have to do some work on it. And we'll get into what I would recommend, in terms of how to get certain things out of each system towards the end of the video here. But yeah, so that's really the big difference for me, and what I've found is the freedom as you're leveling up to level up the way that you choose. And there's a lot of little things that I won't get into, because it's very nitty-gritty, finer details with how that plays out as you go up in one game versus the other game. But just like as a small example, like it's typically the way that your proficiency bonus progresses. If you're going to multi-class in 5th edition, you probably want to multi-class in increments of 4 levels, for example. Whereas in Pathfinder, you might take a 1-level dip, and there's really not a big problem to your overall accuracy. But yeah, so now let's talk about the sort of the pros of 5e, okay? So what I want to say first and foremost is that in this book right here versus in this book right here, if you're building a character level 1 to probably 3, you have a lot more options in 5th edition. Just in this book. Yes, because in addition to the extra races, which, races can make a big difference in how you play your character, not just the way that your bonuses are applied, but also the extra abilities that they give you. But you also, at 3rd level, most classes 3rd level, some at different levels, you get to pick an archetype. And so an archetype in 5th edition can be as minor as determining, does my fighter use heavy weapons exclusively, or is my fighter more of a technical fighter who gets a lot of fun abilities called superiority. And then the third option, and it's all in this book, is now my fighter has some spells. I'm an Eldritch Knight. Oh. Yes, so that's one fun thing that 5th edition did. They also included backgrounds, which are little ways that you can enhance your character by saying, oh, I used to be a fisherman, so even though my class might normally not be proficient with sailing type skills, now I am. And then maybe I also get a little boost, like if I'm a criminal, maybe I speak like the undercommon or the thieves can't kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If I'm a nobleman, maybe I have knowledge nobility type thing that I might not normally have. So that kind of thing. Versus Pathfinder, that at lower levels, you're really just picking race and class. However, the big difference is, like I said, as you begin to level up in Pathfinder, that's when you have more options for how you progress. I really believe that especially depending on how your DM is running it, if he's allowing feats or not, 5th edition, your last meaningful choice for your character might be at level 3, which is very great if you're into just a simple game and you're just there to enjoy the story. That might be plenty for you. It's enough that you got 12 characters with 3 archetypes each. That's 36 different feels to your class. Not to mention, depending on how you build your weapons and things like that. And then, of course, all the racial options on top. So it really is a lot of options. But Pathfinder, you get a feat every 2nd level. You also,
I enjoy that.
It's the best way to make sure that your class plays differently than other classes.
Yeah.
So even though there's only 11 classes in here, and even though there's no archetypes here, but there are archetypes, we'll get into that. There's no archetypes in this book. The fact that you have all the different feats and all the different ways to build your character beyond those first few levels, really you do have more options overall in this, just not at low level.
I was going to say, just based on those decisions, every time you get a feat or whatever, I feel like I could play either of my characters like completely different.
Sure, I mean,
same character, I could have just
Sure.
Completely different flavor.
I mean, just with this book, when this book first came out, I built a very, I built, you shouldn't do it, I don't recommend it, but I built a pretty passable melee combatant wizard. And eventually, of course, it falls off to the point where those feats might have been more useful elsewhere, but for a long time, I was able to contribute in frontline combat.
Because of feats.
Because of the way that, because of feats. And it's, so that's very cool. That's something that can't really do here. Both of them. Mm-hmm.
In a nutshell, though, like this is a lot more customizable.
Yes, this is much more customizable.
You're the guy who sits in the create a character menu.
Right.
And never gets to the game.
Right. So this one out of the gate has hundreds of choices. But after about level 3, your character, if you and another person at your table make the same race choice, class choice, and archetype choice, that's probably it for you. You're probably playing a very similar character. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're both playing wizards, you could just focus on different types of spells, sure. But if you're both playing, assassin rogues, you're going to feel exactly the same. Whereas with just this book, you can have a plethora of different types of assassin rogues. So you do technically have more options here. Now, what I will say in defense of Pathfinder is there's a free PDF that you can download from Paizo's website. I'm not sure how much longer, given that first edition is going away, but that opens you up to a list of things called traits. And at first level, you can pick 2 traits. And traits are functionally backgrounds. They can give you a new class skill. They can give you a small bonus in very situational things to really hammer home the type of character that you were before you started your adventuring career. And so that pretty much meets the background option in terms of customization there. And while it's not in this book, it is a free update. It's something that anybody has access to. And then, like I said about archetypes, while there's no archetypes in the core of Pathfinder, Pathfinder has released dozens of official archetypes for every class. Some of the later ones might only have 6 or 7. Some of them have dozens each. And so there you've got, and that's changing just as much about the class as this one is. It's removing or adding spell casting from different classes, really enhancing spell casting, changing, you've got an archetype on your Magus that makes you go from a prepared caster to a spontaneous caster, and gets a sorcerer bloodline. That's
so fun.
That's big changes. And then my final thing that I will say is that 5th edition right here, this is the Players Handbook. Okay? It's one of 3 books that you would need to play the game. You would need the Player's Handbook, you would need the Dungeon Master's Guide, and you would need the Monster Manual. Okay, those are the core 3. And at about $50 each, you might get a sale, but we'll assume that you're paying full price just to illustrate.
I thought it was all in that one book.
No, that's all the options you would need as a player. If you've got a DM who's already bought the books, that's all you need. You'd be all set. But you can see here, and this one's got a little bit of water damage, so it's a little bit bloated. So we'll just look at the spines. It is very loved. So you can see this book's about twice as thick, and they both retail for $50. And so the reason this one is twice as thick is because this is also your Dungeon Master Guide. They did that because they released the core book before, they wanted to get that out as quick as possible during the big changeover. Like I said, a lot of fun politics there if you want to delve into that. If you love E behind the E True Hollywood Story, behind the music type of stuff, super interesting, check it out. But yeah, so you've got your Dungeon Master's Guide in here, which means all you're missing is a monster manual. And so you can pick that up for $30 to $50, I'm not sure. And then, whereas this you would need 3 books for a total of $150. The reason that I mention that is because while you have more options right here than here, once you pick up, let's say you buy the Monster Manual for both, you buy the Dungeon Master Guide here, so you're at 150 5th edition, and you're at 100 for Pathfinder. That leaves you $40 for the Advanced Player's Guide and Ultimate Magic. And these little splash books. You don't need them, but I'm just saying, as far as dollar for dollar, that's why Pathfinder comes out on top, because they have these great little paper books, and again, they're going away.
But it's not so much who's better.
Right.
On top for you.
Right. Well, I just mean in terms of the character options and the huge wealth. What 5th edition does great at low levels kind of drops away, and Pathfinder has, to be fair, years and years of extra support on it right now. But it's got another big thing is that so Pathfinder launched with 11 games, 5e launched with 12 games. Or 12 player classes. Pathfinder launched with 11 classes. 5th edition launched with 12 classes. But 5th edition still technically only has 12 classes. We're 3 years in, 4 years in maybe more. Still just 3 or 12 classes. Whereas Pathfinder, and this may be a pro or a con for you, depending on how you want to look at it. But Pathfinder with different books, like these smaller books right here, introduce new classes all the time. I think that one has 11 new classes in it, 10 or 11. And so, I mean, right there you see how many more options. And each of those classes has dozens of archetypes.
But if you, let's say you're just playing for the first time, or DMing for the first time, probably 5e, because that's a lot to...
Oh, sure. I mean, it's a lot to digest. And again, and I can't stress this enough, if you're getting into the hobby right now, I'm going to say 5th edition should be where you start, especially as a dungeon master. That bonded accuracy and many other little rules changes they made have made this a very easy game to run, especially as your first game.
Yeah.
It seems daunting, but I can assure you, compared to most every other game I've ever played, it really puts it on easy mode for the dungeon master. Not to say it is easy, just comparatively easy. Whereas Pathfinder has, I'll be honest, it has too many rules. It has a lot of rules that you're not going to remember. It has a lot of rules that are needlessly complex. It's one reason why I'm such a big fan of home brewing, is because a lot of it can be simplified. A lot of that.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about home brewing on this channel too. But that's why you like Pathfinder, right? Because you do homebrew so much.
Well, yeah, and to be fair, you can homebrew 5th edition. Like, one of my biggest complaints about 5th edition is the fact that you can't charge anymore without a feat. It's just an example. Well, really, the fact that feats are considered an optional rule in 5th edition, which is... it was really the deal breaker for me when it came out. I was listening to everything they said until they told me that I might be on Roll20 online somewhere, and not only would a DM tell me that I'm not permitted a specific feat, he might tell me I'm not permitted any feats. And as a guy who likes customization, like you said, that really...
And feats every 2 levels or whatever.
Exactly. Versus here, even if you're allowing feats, it's only 1 every 4 levels. To be fair, the feats are...
Feats time is best time. I love that part when I'm leveling up.
Great. It is great. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say that when...
I mean, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Pages and pages and pages.
Especially if you get on the SRD, I mean, you could be there for days. But a lot of people, it's like when you turn on Netflix and there's a 1,000 things on there to watch and you end up not watching anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's it really comes down to how much crunch are you looking for. If you're a new player, I really do recommend 5th edition. While it's not my preferred one to play and run, I think especially the fact that 1st edition is about to go the wayside, 1st edition Pathfinder is about to go the wayside, my recommendation would be 5th edition. However, if you've been playing 5th edition for a while, or you just, maybe you're coming from a crunchier game system, or maybe you're just the kind of person that really likes to get down into nitty gritty, crunchy, tactics. I mean, if you're a tactics guy, there's so many more options, and so much crazier you can get, and so many different kinds of builds you can make, that you can really, and that's really what it comes down to, I think, is, do you want to have a character that is just a set, standard wizard, fighter, that type of thing? Or do you want to make something that's wholly your own? If you want to make something that's wholly your own, you either need to homebrew, or I would say look into Pathfinder. And there's a lot of archetypes, and they're great archetypes, but to really get access to a lot of those. You're going to be buying just as many books as you would for Pathfinder to get other classes.
Probably a lot easier to find 5e games too if you're a player.
Yes, online or in person.
And a DM looking for players, really.
Yeah, I mean, 5th edition, it's the zeitgeist right now. It's the big game, and we'll see what happens when Pathfinder 2nd edition comes out. And we'll probably do another video like this and talk about that. But again, there's just a lot of reasons to play 5th edition right now, even though my heart is in Pathfinder. I would recommend you to pick up 5th edition.
I think mostly for new DMs. I think a new player could. Yeah, our whole party was almost, well, everyone but 2. So 3 of us were new. It was our first game, first real game. And I mean, I felt like we caught on pretty fast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as players, certainly, they are not that different as players.
Yeah.
It's like
you have a DM to kind of help you through everything.
Well, and you can stick to this right here. If you're new and you're intimidated by all the extra books and extra options, like I said, I built a fairly viable melee wizard without multi-classing with just this core book right here. So you have a lot of options right there that are much simpler and more straightforward than some of the weirder classes that they introduced later, and they get weird, Magus. And then also in this one thing that 5th edition doesn't have is Pathfinder, because this is also the Dungeon Master's Guide. It also features what are called prestige classes, which is something that 5th edition doesn't even have anymore. But they are special, very specialized classes that you can meet prerequisites for, like maybe you have to have a certain number of spell ranks or a certain base attack bonus, things like that.
So I've had my eye on the Harrower, right? And it's kind of interesting because it's definitely more about the story, because it's not actually that useful, but it seems really fun. So if I do play this character, first I have to build a character who would feed into it. It's probably not going to be the most powerful character, but the story and the personality will be really interesting. And
well,
the more I look at it, I'm like, but I could get cooler superpowers if I do something else.
Well, and that is really it's a big thing for Pathfinder, because while it's nice in 5th edition that you have these archetypes that you can just slot into at 3rd level to set yourself apart, while I would say most prestige classes are probably a power downgrade from if you just continued your base class, they are very flavorful choices. They are very niche, very unique characters come from doing a prestige class, and that's something that I think even 2nd edition Pathfinder is dropping, which is, it's kind of a bummer. I mean, well, I think that what they're wanting to do, and we'll see when it actually comes out, but I think what they're wanting to do is really just mimic the archetype feel a lot more from 5th edition, where you kind of you make that choice early on, but that's kind of one of the things that I like about the prestige classes, is because you can kind of go on a journey with your character to qualify for them, and you can, your DM can help you out, and really you can build the story around. A great example is in one of my first campaigns, Alan, he wanted to be a dragon rider, so he had to start fighter, and then I think he took a couple levels.
Oh, the guy who rode a dinosaur in our game?
Yes.
What a shock.
And he wanted, so he started as a fighter, then he found out about the dragon rider. He realized he had to take some levels of cavalier, so he did that, so that he could meet all his prerequisites, and then he got a pretty nice horse, and had the campaign continued, eventually maybe ride a dragon. And then once he did that, take that prestige class and get some really fun things that he would have never done if he hadn't seen that the option was to build into that direction.
And this is a player who's all about the character.
Right, yeah.
He's not the guy who's like trying to build the most powerful. He's there for mostly jokes. And I mean, RP.
Yeah.
Whereas, I think he might get a little bored in 5e.
I definitely think...
Oh, he probably played 5e with you, huh?
No, I never played 5e with me, no. No, 5e is... I mean, I did get bored. But that was because I was coming from 3.0, so your mileage may vary. You may find that it's got plenty of options, but I was coming from a game where I got feats every couple levels while still being able to increase my stats.
You got bored as a player, I
got bored as a player, yeah. And it just, you just feel like, for me, like you don't have quite as many options, that you're really locked into a character path. And you can still multi-class, that's true. But like one thing, just again, I know we've kind of been going on for a long time, but so in this game, you pick your archetype at 3rd level, that's set, you're that archetype. Pathfinder's archetypes, if you find an archetype that you like, and then you find another archetype that you kind of like too, each archetype will switch out main abilities from the core class. So if you have 2 archetypes that don't switch out the same abilities, that don't affect the same things, you can have 2 archetypes applied to your character. And that's pretty wild. You can have your, I don't really know of any off the top of my head that combine well, but I mean, you can really just, if you want to put in the time and you really want to make something unique, it's very, very easy to do in Pathfinder. I won't say easy. It's very possible in Pathfinder. But yeah, I mean, we'll see, what happens when we get 2nd edition out. It's looking to be very different from what I've seen. Again, I don't want to do any reviews or anything until I've actually got the new book in my hand. But I do know that it is going to go this route, again, where your Players Handbook and your Dungeon Master Guide are combined, which is just great because it means that as long as you're willing to make up monster stats or port them over from another book, you can start with just one $60 purchase versus needing to start with 2 $50 purchases. And then I'm sure the bestiary will come out a little bit later, but that's really the high level pros and cons. We didn't really get specifically into what kind of rules differences there are really. We just sort of got into what you might like about one. One is big choices early and otherwise very simplified both for the player and for the DM. And I don't mean simplified as in dumbed down. I don't mean to imply that there aren't a lot of complex things to get your head around and a lot of ways that you can dive in and get nitty gritty with it.
It's just a cleaner set of...
It's a much cleaner set of rules.
Guideline.
Yeah, and much fewer rules.
Yeah. A little more straightforward.
Yeah. I mean, you've got big overarching ideas that apply to lots of multiple things, whereas Pathfinder has a whole lot of little ideas all together in one.
Gears and
yeah, lots of things that you can, as a home brewer, you can play with and you can tweak and you can get a lot of fun out of it that way. And that you as a player can use to make a specialized character. That's one of my biggest complaints as the player, is that in 5th edition, my character's only going to be so good at something. Even things that I'm good at. I mean, you just have to watch Critical Role and you can see how often Grog is missing swings. And that's something that, it should happen sometimes, but it's just wild to me that you have a character that all he does is swing big weapons at people.
So, Percy and his gun?
Well, now Percy is a great fun thing because
he was in Pathfinder first.
Yes, so the Critical Role cast, all their characters were originally in Pathfinder. I have a feeling, I've never seen it stated anywhere specifically, but I have a feeling that part of the deal to go to the stream was part of what allowed them to do that was switching to 5e as a sort of a promotion thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure it got them a lot of considerations from Wizards of the Coast and things like that.
We don't know that for sure.
We don't know that, but that's sort of my suspicion. But yeah, Percy was a Pathfinder. Percy is a great example because 5th edition still doesn't really have a gunslinger. I know Matt has published with the Dungeon Masters Guild. He's published a homebrew version, but it is still not an official. Yeah, officially there are still only 12 classes. And the archetypes, while the DM Guild is great, it's a great place for homebrewers to go and post 5th edition classes and archetypes that you've made up. They are still not technically canon.
So a better example then would be Vex.
Yes, Vex would be a great example.
She seemed even a little like...
Well, I mean, it's very well documented how bad the Beastmaster Hunter is in 5th edition, to the point that when they
I'm glad she's got spells now.
To the point that when they were going to do an updated version of these books, it was suggested that they might include some buffs to the Beastmaster, but to my knowledge, they did not. But yes, so really that's the big differences between the two. Both are great systems. Both are great games. I recommend whichever one you pick. I recommend you pick one or some other game. I definitely recommend you get into the hobby. It's a lot of fun. These just happen to be two of the biggest names in the hobby, but there's hundreds, literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of other games. There's games that don't even use D20s. There's games that, like Vampire the Masquerade doesn't use D20s.
Yeah, which is on Geek and Sundry now.
Yeah, you can watch and play that on Geek and Sundry. It's a very different type of game.
Very little on their sheets, it sounds like. I've only watched,
my experience with Vampire Masquerade, it was an earlier edition. It was an earlier edition, but my experience was a lot on this sheet.
No, I mean like what they roll for, like.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they definitely don't roll as much, and the rolls don't, and that's
heavily story based.
Yes, and there's a lot of games like that. One of my favorite story based games is Fate. It's a fantastic Spirit of the Century, I think it is their main book, but a lot of games use the Fate system, and it's a very streamlined, very simple, all story. There's not a lot of rules for can I do this or how do I do this. It's all rules for really very little rules.
What happens
honestly.
When I do this?
Yeah, it's much more about that.
So that might be good for someone brand new.
I would say no, just because not everybody's going to be able to jump into a character like that. If you think your players can do it, I really recommend Fate. It's super fun.
If you're like actors or performers or something, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if you definitely have
improv,
you and your team.
That's what I struggle with. I'm not good at that.
But yeah, I mean, it's so rules light that it really comes down to what instead of coming down to like these games, what is my character good at, or how do I use my character to accomplish a thing. It's much more about just what am I trying to accomplish, not how do I fit that into the brackets of my character, but just what's my thing to do right now.
I think that at the end of the day, if you're a player and you're looking for a game and you can't really decide which one to do, I think it's probably more about the DM. Find a table that you fit in, because that's the most important thing. You can have the perfect game, but if the chemistry's not right at the table, it's
right.
Doesn't matter.
Right, and we want to say these games, this hobby is for everyone, but not necessarily every table is necessarily for everyone.
You gotta find your fit.
Yeah.
I actually played a couple of games before, and I was like, I don't like this at all. I hate Dungeons and Dragons. I'm never gonna play this again. It's so stupid, and everyone's really mean, and I don't like it. And then now we have 2 games with all new people, and I'm having so much fun. In every single, we play every other week, and one we play even more because we couldn't stand waiting.
We play 4 to 6 times a month, I would say.
And every time it's like, is it time for D&D yet? So it's just about the people you play with. So don't put too much pressure on if you've decided after this, like, oh, I definitely want to play Pathfinder, but there's only 5e games. Try a 5e game if that's what you have.
Yeah.
And that's something else. I've noticed a lot of people just can't find a table. Check Meetup.
Yeah, Meetup is huge. If you have a friendly neighborhood game store, that is,
or comic book shop,
comic book shop, even you might anything where nerds congregate is a good bet. For example, I was actually at a bookstore last week. And I was just perusing over in the hobby section, and there was a mother there, and she was desperate. She had a son whose birthday was coming up, and he'd just gotten into it, and he was really hoping to be able to run his own game for his family, and she had no idea how to help him. And I'm not sure what that very nice woman would have done if I hadn't happened along, but I can say without a doubt that that kid got a good birthday.
And also, we live in a big city now, but we grew up in a really small town, and there were a lot of D&D players hiding in the woodwork there.
Yeah, they were not easy to find.
You would be surprised.
Not easy to find.
They're not easy to find, but we didn't have social media, though.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't have Roll20, which is a phenomenal resource. We'll do an episode.
Too, yeah, you can play online.
We'll do an episode. Really, we'll do an episode on just finding a group.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I'm seeing most in the community is, you know, I think a lot of people are watching things like Critical Role and like, oh man, I wish I could play too, but there's just nobody. But I promise you, they're everywhere. And when you start telling people you play, they're like, I've always wanted to try that. There's so many people who say, I've always wanted to try it.
Well, and I will say this, if you really can't find a game, start a game. A lot of people's problem is that running a game seems like a lot of work, a lot of stress, it seems really scary, and it is all those things. But it's also, I mean, it's my favorite thing to do. I'd love to be a character once in a while, but I much prefer playing a game. Maybe it's just a testament to me being a control freak or something like that. But I have a lot of fun doing it. My favorite thing is when something happens in my game and my players are talking about it afterwards. There's few things in life as rewarding as inventing.
Basically, all we talk about.
It's just inventing fun for your friends and then seeing them enjoy it, and it's a great experience. So if you can't find a game. If you can't find a DM, be the DM. You can do it. I believe in you.
Maybe start with 5e.
Maybe start with 5e. Yeah.
All right, so I guess that's about it for this topic. If you have any questions or you want to, you know, learn a little bit more about something specific, let us know. We're just getting started on this channel, and we have a lot of ideas, but we want to address what you guys want to hear first. Right. So just put something in the comments.
Right. I mean, a big part of the channel is trying to help new players get into the hobby and show them that it's not that scary and that anybody can do it. And so if you have any questions, even if they seem really simple and you're not finding any answers online, put them down in the comments. We'll be happy to answer.
We're on Twitter and all that stuff too.
Yeah, we're on Twitter.
We're easy to find.
Yeah, we're trying to be. But yeah, thank you so much. Welcome to the collective, and
hope to see you next time.
Yeah, bye.